the chat too. And we will answer them during the Q&A. And I would like to introduce Tracy Frisch. She is a very respected journalist, as well as an environmental organizer for the past 30 years. And she is the founder and co-founder of Zero Waste Warren County. Warren County is located to the south.
North of Albany,
Yes, north of Albany, southeast of Adirondacks Park. And she's been doing really amazing work. So she's very respected in the Capital District. She used to live in Albany, and now she's in Warren County. And she's a co-founder and the chair of Clean Air Action Network of Glen Falls, fighting incinerator there. And also she's actively working with Zero Waste Warren County, which she founded. And she, for the past several years, she's been researching about sewage sludge and its problems. So thank you so much, Tracy, for being here. We really appreciate you being here. It's such an honor. And I would like you to take it away and educate us on the problem of sewage sludge being applied to the lands.
Thank you, Yayoi. I'm pleased that there's interest in this important topic. So I just want to start by saying that the title of this presentation is wrong, because I have been suffering very much from carpal tunnel for the last month, and I cannot manipulate, I cannot replace the slides. So I'm going to skip around and try and keep it within time, but I've been looking into PFAS for the last 5 years. I've been very interested in PFAS, and we've had a number of serious problems. I won't go into them, but people may have heard about of Hoosick Falls, which was kind of the first hotspot that came to the attention of the state in New York. And I'm about 30 miles away from there. So I gave a talk 4 weeks ago, and that's what this is from. So hopefully I can, yes, okay. So I want to start just by telling you what PFAS is. And don't worry, this talk is not going to be heavy on the chemistry, but it's worth knowing what PFAS is and why it's a problem. PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So it's a plural, and all four letters are capitalized. I see PFA apostrophe S. No, it's PFAS. And
excuse me, Tracy, I'm sorry, but like the slide is still loading. Do you have?
It's still loading? That's so weird. Huh. Can you see it now?
No.
No, I mean, it's been
black and it says loading.
Oh my. Because I'm on fiber optic, I should not have a problem here. I could do this whole talk without slides, so you can just ignore the slides. Okay. And I will just talk and
stopping share and starting again. See if that does.
Okay. I will do that. Resume. Oh, okay. I see. For some reason, stop share and okay. Thank you. Oh, jeez. We'll see. Now I've lost the Zoom meeting. Okay.
We're there somewhere.
Share. Okay. Does that work? Is it sharing? I mean, you were not seeing anything, but.
Oh yeah, no.
Okay.
It's there.
Okay, let me put it on. Okay, put it in the right format. Oh, Jesus. Okay, no. Slideshow. Okay, how is that?
Ooh, let's
It
see.
disappeared again.
Excuse me?
It disappeared again.
Okay, I will try one more time and then I don't need the slides. I can talk about PFAS in my sleep, unfortunately.
There it is, Tracy.
Oh,
It's
okay,
right there.
okay, now I've
I
lost
think
it.
we can just look at this and we don't.
Okay, do you see
Yeah,
it
you
now?
don't have to do it that way. Just leave it the other way.
Okay, okay, I will just advance the slides. Is that fine with everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just telling you what PFAS is because there's a lot of confusion. So PFAS is a large class of
See,
very,
I'm sorry. I'm gonna interrupt. So you just clicked slideshow. But I think if what we want to see, what was working is if we see your slide sorter view,
oh, okay.
Yes.
So
then we'll see your thumbnails, but we'll also see your slides, and we're
Okay,
generally
okay.
a friendly bunch, I believe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've done this without any slides and,
this
so
is-
you can see that?
yes,
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, then I will just advance when I want to advance. So,
Perfect. Thank you.
I will just tell you what PFAS means. There are PFAS are chemicals that have a carbon backbone that's full of fluorine atoms. And so, I mean, that's kind of the easiest way to say, if there's any people who are chemists here, you can read the stuff and I'm sure you know what an alkyl group is. So normally a carbon chain would have hydrogens on it, but in this case, the fluorines replace the hydrogens. And the thing that's important about the fluorine carbon bond is extremely strong. It's not found in nature. And because of the strength of it, they're extremely persistent. And here's a couple of the most notorious PFAS, PFOA and PFOS. The small gray circles are the carbons. The slightly green, you can't quite see that they're green, but there's 2 of them on each carbon, and those are fluorine atoms. So these are chains. And something you might want to know about fluorine. Fluorine is a halogen, the same as chlorine and iodine, and bromine. So bromine, fluorine, and chlorine are associated with extremely persistent and often carcinogenic compounds. Bromine is found in many flame retardants. Chlorine is found in PCBs, DDT, a number of those kinds of persistent organochlorines. And so the fact that it has a halogen is a giveaway that it's a toxic and persistent chemical. And so this is just more about that. So, okay, as I said, they're extremely persistent. PFAS are so persistent that they degrade in geological time, not in the human lifespan. And when PFAS are in our bodies, they are not excreted on a regular basis. They will, the half-life might be 5 years. So they will be in your body for a long, long time. And if you're ingesting PFAS through your drinking water, then you're just going to keep getting more PFAS. They bioaccumulate, so they accumulate up the food chain. If there's PFAS in the water, there'll be PFAS in the algae, and then PFAS in the small animals that eat the algae, and then in the fish that eat the small animals, etc. So that's another reason why they're so dangerous. Okay, this is irrelevant for this purpose. I'm sorry. Okay, so PFOA, one of those notorious PFAS chemicals, were extensively studied. There was the largest epidemiological study of a human population on a single chemical in the Ohio River Valley as a result of a lawsuit against a DuPont. DuPont Teflon plant had been contaminating the Ohio River and all the drinking water downstream for decades. and in a lawsuit, it was brilliant. There was an epidemiological study of this population of 70,000 people. And the plaintiffs decided to pay people $400 a piece to get their blood tested and to share their medical records. And as a result, this was this study had a lot of power. That is, this study, the fact that they found correlations or links between certain diseases and high levels of PFAS in people's blood, makes it a very meaningful study because it was a large population and they had good data. So the health conditions or diseases in red are the ones that were found to be linked with PFOA in this study: elevated cholesterol, preeclampsia, high blood pressure during pregnancy, testicular and kidney cancer, thyroid disease, and ulcerative colitis. So all of these have the possibility of being extremely serious, especially the cancers and the colitis, I would say. There's a lot of research going on. I went to a webinar, a scientific webinar in the last few months, and it was about where the lead researcher was a physician and a health researcher, health scientist, and she was looking at possible links between high PFAS in the blood in children and fatty liver disease. And they were also looking at elevated liver enzymes, and they found a correlation. So which means it's likely that PFAS is causing liver damage, which is not surprising. So, okay, just going through. Okay, little bit about health advisories. So in June, EPA issued a health advisory that was more than 1,000 times more protective than previous health advisories on PFOA, or excuse me, on certain PFAS chemicals in drinking water. In New York, our standard is 10 parts per trillion for PFOA. That's the maximum contamination level in drinking water. I love this. 1 part per trillion is equivalent to a single drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Wow.
The health advisory that EPA issued was lower than the detection limit in the parts per quadrillion. So they're telling the states, the EPA is telling the states that they should be worried about contamination lower than can be detected at present. Okay, so I like the first statement. EPA is saying that PFOA is 17,500 times more toxic than they thought in 2016 and 100,000 times more toxic than they thought in 2009. Just to say the science is constantly evolving, we continuously find that PFAS chemicals are more serious, have more serious adverse effects at lower levels than we previously suspected. Okay, you can be exposed to PFAS by contaminated water or food or hand-to-mouth contact if you touch something that's contaminated, through contaminated dust or particulate matter. And this is particularly important with contaminated farmland, because in dry times, the soil becomes dust and you inhale it. You also touch it and you get it in your mouth. And dermal. So we now know that PFAS can be absorbed through the skin. There are, I usually say, 12,000 different types of different PFAS compounds. The important thing to know is that most tests only look for 15 or 30. And sometimes because there's so many and we can't possibly test for 10,000 PFAS chemicals. Sometimes the testing is done for total fluorine content. Fluorine is not, for example, if you're trying to figure out if there's PFAS in food wrapping paper, what PFAS would it be? But there shouldn't be any fluorine in the food wrapping paper. So there were tests done for fluorine, and then they could do a further test for organic fluorine. Remember that carbon fluorine bond that would determine if it's an organic fluorine. And then you can come to some determination. There's most likely PFAS in that material. So just real quickly, how are these PFAS used? As you know from Teflon, Teflon is no stick. Fire and heat resistant properties are some of the common properties, also water repellent, stain resistant, and oil and grease resistant. So this is why industry uses PFAS in so many applications. And I'll show you some of the applications momentarily. They're persistent. I've talked about persistence and toxicity. They're taken up efficiently by plants from soil and water. They accumulate up the food chain. They tend to leach through the soil. They're mobile in the environment, and they're water soluble. Not very good characteristics for something that's so toxic. Okay. Household cleaning products, outdoor clothing. I would guess that every one of us here has PFAS, in outdoor clothing and rain gear, perhaps, or outdoor camping equipment. Cosmetics, shampoo, not in all cosmetics or shampoo, but in many of them. Carpeting, PFAS in carpeting has now been banned in New York, but that will take a while to go into effect. Many of us have, stain resistant carpeting. It's present in many places. Paints, varnishes, and caulks, and of course, Teflon pots, and upholstered furniture and car interiors. Okay, so that's all we need to know about where it is. So why is it in sewage sludge? Let's see, I'm getting to the sewage sludge. Oh, sorry, I hadn't thought I would be able to get rid of all this stuff. Before I go any further, sewage sludge is often burned in incinerators, and there's studies that show that PFAS is not destroyed except at extremely high temperatures. Sometimes there's products of incomplete combustion, which means that part of the PFAS degrades, but part of it is still there, and then they recombine. So you have new PFAS chemicals. If you're only testing for 15 or 30, you're not going to test these additional PFAS chemicals. Okay. Okay, so how does it get in sewage sludge? Well, we went through, I talked about some of the products that PFAS is found in. Cosmetics, if it's in cosmetics or in shampoo, guess where it's going to go? It's going to go to the wastewater treatment plant. These things don't break down. If it's in apparel and you wash them in your washing machine or in your sink, some of the PFAS will get into the wastewater treatment plant. Also in Teflon, as Teflon gets old, if it's scratched, it loses some of the Teflon will, break off. So those are just examples. It's also in floor wax, for example, and some car wax. Really brilliant to put this highly persistent chemical in cleaning and maintenance products. It is found in all sewage sludge that has been tested. It would also be found in any septic waste that's tested, unless the people whose septic tank, who own the, who use that septic tank, are not using any PFAS in their home. Some wastewater treatment plants have much higher levels of PFAS, and that's because they take landfill leachate. landfills, you can imagine they have PFAS in them because of all those products that we throw away. And all landfills, we live in a temperate climate, there's rain and there's also liquids in the landfill. And so there are, in modern sanitary landfills, there is plastic on the bottom and there's a system for collecting the leachate. All the water that runs through the landfill has to be collected. And we're talking about tens of thousands of gallons every week. And that has to be dealt with. And typically landfill operators truck it or sometimes pipe it, but typically truck it to wastewater treatment plants. And there have been studies that show that wastewater treatment plants that accept landfill leachate have much higher levels of PFAS. So I think that is, hopefully that should convince you that there's PFAS in sewage sludge. Can you see this slide? Is that big enough for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Can you see it better? No.
It disappears.
Okay, well, I have no idea why that's doing that, but okay. I love this slide. It just is showing you different routes where PFAS enters the environment. And I can email this if necessary. Okay. So third to half of all sewage sludge in the US is land applied. And if that isn't good enough, there are companies that take sewage sludge and compost it and sell it to consumers, mostly sold in big box stores. If you're buying compost, you can look on the product label will have to say made from biosolids. And it could say that in very small letters. Biosolids is the euphemistic term for sewage sludge and paper sludge. It was coined by the public relations industry on behalf of wastewater treatment plants. There's a whole industry of wastewater treatment plants, even though for the most part, they're municipally owned and managed, but not entirely. And they wanted a better term for their waste. So they came up with biosolids, and that's what the bags will say. And the Ann Arbor Ecology Center and the Michigan Sierra Club bought bags of biosolid compost from all over the country, and they tested it, and it was very high in PFAS. They have a great report. I can get that and share that with Yayoi. There is almost no testing of sewage sludge for PFAS in New York State. It's not required. There's also at least one company that manufactures fertilizer out of sewage sludge. They have a large plant in Franklin County, north of the Adirondacks. It's the name of the company is Casella. They're a large integrated waste services corporation. And the New York State does not require testing of that sewage sludge or the fertilizer for PFAS. New York State has tested exactly, as of the summer, exactly 8 different wastewater, the sewage sludge from exactly 8 wastewater treatment plants done in 2017. And I have the results. Environmental Working Group estimates that PFAS from sewage sludge has contaminated 20 million acres of cropland in the US. Okay, I think I have that slide, but maybe not. Oh, here it is. Okay, this is really small, so if I can increase the size. The main point is in all 8 tests, the levels of the PFAS tested were in the parts per billion. Remember, the drinking water standard is 10 parts per trillion. So this is 1,000 times higher, or 500 times higher, whatever. And in Maine, they set limits in recent years for the amount of PFOS and PFOA, the 2 most common and notorious PFAS chemicals. All the New York samples exceeded those limits. Maine since has banned all use of sewage sludge on farmland. And that happened last April or May because of contamination incidents. In fact, in 2 cases that were most well publicized, 2 farms, the contamination, the sewage sludge was applied 40 years ago. PFAS is very persistent. In one case, the farm couple was not alive when they were not born yet, when the sewage sludge was applied. And they're organic, and sewage sludge is not allowed on organic farmland, on certified organic land. But, you know, no one has to know, there's no requirement that a farm owner keep records for 40 years. The previous landowner died of cancer. The landowner that this couple bought it from. So there's a lot of this not only affects the land that where the sewage sludge is applied, and the sewage sludge can be applied as a fertilizer, as a, you know, pellets, as compost. It doesn't have to be applied as, you know, sewage sludge per se, or biosolids per se. It's but it still might smell really bad. And I can attest to that because a farmer near me applied sewage sludge fertilizer in the winter. No one had any idea. And a lot of people were calling their propane company to ask if there was a leak because it smelled like that, hydrogen sulfide. But ultimately it came out which farm had done this. There was an inversion. They had a large pile of it. So farmers have contaminated their land with irrigation water, an irrigation well that was contaminated by a neighbor's sewage sludge application. Yeah, there's a lot of problems. Okay, this is the young couple, certified organic, and they had no idea. They're not farming. Their blood levels were 250 times the level of the average American that's been tested. So I just want to make the point that PFAS is just one of many, many contaminants, pollutants in sewage sludge. There's hundreds of them and there's no testing. And there's other ways that PFAS contaminates farms, from industrial plants, incineration, firefighting foam, and also, and this is the end basically, also it's been detected in some food and yard waste composts. And I suspect it's from PFAS in supposedly biodegradable packaging. The BPI certified compostable packaging is PFAS free, but there's other kinds of products that have been used, or food wrappers from fast food restaurants, for example, getting in the compost. So that's what I suspect the sources are, but there might be others. So that is it. I welcome questions and thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. This has been
Oh.
very, very interesting. Yes?
Do you see my last slide?
Would we just terrorist poison? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, no.
Okay. So I see there's some questions in the chat. Should I look at them or do you want to read them?
Yes, I saw one. Jonathan was asking if you have links to sources to studies.
Oh, so let me tell you. The Sierra Club Atlantic chapter, which is a New York chapter, will soon in February will be releasing a briefing paper, which is currently 25 pages and it totally referenced. I was the lead author, but there's a number of people helping me. My first draft was 5 pages and now it's 25 pages, but it's full of sources. So And I think, Jonathan, that I gave you and Allison access to it, but I guess you might not have seen it, or maybe the access failed. Because it's currently in review. And yeah. So
see.
just about every source that I mentioned is everything that I mentioned is referenced in that statement, in that briefing paper, which will be done with a media event in February, probably late February. And we have a number of recommendations to the state legislature as well, including banning the use of sewage sludge type products of any sort on farmland and in horticulture, agriculture.
Excellent. We look
Yes.
forward to the report.
Oh, great. Yes. Someone posted the Sierra Club study of the biosolid based compost.
Yeah, I think that's me.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. I'm just going through this.
Yes. Jonathan, did you have a question? Like your hands up. I just noticed your hand.
Oh,
is up.
well, okay. So I will I'm going to read this and then we can go to Jonathan. They're only requirement that wastewater treatment plants have for sewage sludge is that they test for 9 or 10 heavy metals and that they test for E. coli. So they send they send a sample out and have it tested. You know, and even if it's in New York, even if it's contaminated with high levels of heavy metals, the state allows it to be spread on farmland. I've been in touch with the regulator for biosolids since 2020. I've talked to her numerous times. And the interesting thing is when I talked to her in 2020 and I was asking her about PFAS, she didn't tell me that they had tested for PFAS in 2017. It was only in 2022 when I did a Freedom of Information request that I got that data. Yeah. Yeah, I just had an exchange with her this week because she told me in the middle of last year that the state was going to contract with SUNY ESF in Syracuse to test sewage sludge from 100 wastewater treatment plants. There are 600 wastewater treatment plants in the state. And I have been asking her if the contract has been executed. And she keeps on saying, not quite yet. So we will see when it's executed. In addition, I've asked her if there's any testing, if she's planning on doing any testing of soil on land where sewage sludge has been applied. And she said no, or water. In Maine, they identified 700 sites that they were going to test soil, water, and crops, you know, depending on what was on that particular site. They identified the sites based on historic sewage sludge applications. And I don't have the results from that. I can actually inquire about that.
Can I ask a question, Tracy?
Sure, maybe I can answer, maybe not.
So it's my understanding that all of these compounds are made as mixtures, basically, and that chemically it's very difficult to separate them out. So, you know, when they say that they're making a certain substance, or this is, you know, Teflon is made from one thing or another, that's not strictly true because there's a whole, you know, there's a whole mixture of things in there. Then you know, the focus on a few of these chemicals is kind of a distraction in a way.
Exactly.
And
Good
people
point.
should be aware of that.
It's a
They're
really
all probably
good point.
similarly toxic.
And in fact, the advocates who want to ban PFAS chemicals are saying we need to do this as a whole class of chemicals. All these chemicals need to go. There's a phenomenon I didn't go into called regrettable substitutions, where you say PFOA is terrible. PFOA was essential for making Teflon. It's not in Teflon. It's a precursor for the Teflon. And so DuPont, in its infinite wisdom, came up with another chemical, which I can't believe the name they gave it, Gen X. And it's a less persistent chemical. It's harder to filter out. And it's already, the production facility for Gen X is in North Carolina. And they spun off a company called Chemours. I don't know how you say it, CHEMOURS.
Mhm.
And it's already contaminated drinking water there. It's already contaminated the river that this factory is on. But yeah, there's a lot of little tricks that industry has to throw people off the trail. And agents fed the EPA and the DEC have only set standards for a few of these chemicals. I'm engaged in a struggle to stop the approval for a sewage sludge biochar plant. And it was approved by the town planning board in Saratoga County, a town on the Hudson River, the town of Moreau. Our organization is suing the town planning board with a, well, what is going on? That's not me. Oh, well.
Me.
Okay. Anyway, and I discovered through a technical expert that's assisting us that New York State Department of Health has only set one standard for air emissions, and that's only for PFOA. And I told you there's products of incomplete combustion that it actually, the temperature for the destruction of PFAS chemicals is like 2,600 Fahrenheit, far higher than any biochar plant gets and higher than incinerators typically get. And so there only would be testing for PFOA. But even if there was PFOA to start, it would have turned into another PFAS chemical. When the temperature gets elevated, it breaks not the fluorine carbon bond breaking, but the side chains, the oxygen and sulfur containing chains. They would break off, and the chlorine, fluorine chains would recombine. So, I mean, it's all a little bit of a, I don't know what the term is, but it's the regulation is not being done to protect us or to keep these things out of the environment. Very disturbing. So, Joel.
It is indeed disturbing. What I understand it. I know this because our local water district is having to do testing. The DEC is requiring the
Yeah.
water supplies to test for PFAS.
Yes.
And that will give us some idea, you know, how widespread the groundwater contamination is. But if this stuff is a water soluble, you alluded to it earlier. I mean, if all the septic systems have got to, you know, the effluent from the septic systems is dispersed in the groundwater, essentially.
Yeah, there are so many sources of contamination of our water. And because it's also air deposition, and I learned this early on because we have factories in our area where private wells that were nowhere near the factory were contaminated in North Bennington, Vermont. And there was no way it was getting there through the water. And it turned out that there were studies had been done, I think in Ireland, showing the air deposition. And then, you know, goes out the smokestack, goes on the ground, and leaches through the soil. So it's, there was a slide that I didn't show, an estimated 57,000 sites of contamination in the US. But I want to warn you, some people say PFAS is everywhere, let's just give up. Well, no, because the more you're exposed to, the more dangerous it is. So I doubt there's going to be any remediation method for whole aquifers or for, you know, hundreds of acres of farmland. But I think we are close to developing ways of breaking the fluorine carbon bond for small amounts of this class of chemicals. So if we could do that from concentrated sources like landfill leachate, we would be in much better shape than if we put that. Not only does it go in the wastewater treatment plants, contaminating sewage sludge, but the effluent goes into our rivers and into our lakes and into the ocean. A study came out last week that found that freshwater fish in the US were highly contaminated with PFAS. It's not surprising.
Yeah.
So this is all very sobering.
It's also what's particularly disturbing about this is that, as a zero waster, we waste a huge amount of nutrients by landfilling our sludge instead of land applying it. And basically this is like saying, well, no, we can't land apply it because it's so contaminated. It's outrageous that it's contaminated so that we can't use it.
Well, and I would argue that I was on the National Recycling Coalition for 6 months. I was an appointee and decided not to run. I just got off in November off the board, and I'm still working with a committee, an ad hoc committee. But I think we have a problem. If we are taking contaminated, materials that are contaminated with pollutants, basically, and recycling them, whether we're talking about plastics, paper, sewage sludge, or whatever, we are doing no one a service. We are creating an even worse environmental health disaster. And so I think that actually the whole movement needs to focus some on contaminants. I see too many people who are trying to promote, a circular economy, just saying we need to recycle, but you have to look at what you're recycling, or else you're just creating more harm. Do no harm. Yeah. Any other comments, questions?
Kind of depressing, though, that we can't do what we really should be doing. It's unsustainable to just keep using nutrients, passing them through the plants, eating them, and then throwing the result away.
Well, I live in the middle of nowhere, not exactly, but I live in a rural area. And so I have a composting toilet. It's just a pine box bucket system. And
Yeah.
I'm able to compost my human waste, but I don't put it in my food garden. I put it in my perennials. Just so I don't, I cannot guarantee that there are no pathogens, and I share my food with people, but it is going back on the land.
Yeah.
But I don't put chemicals and wastewater in my compost. That's only, human waste.
Right. And I've read, and you probably have too, about the heavy metals and the other contaminants that were of concern before this came on the radar, that were being dealt with in terms of reducing the prevalence in the sewage sludge that was then used for land application. And it looked like we were making progress, but then this comes along and throws a big monkey wrench in the whole thing.
I think the awareness of PFAS is growing exponentially. I don't go a week without finding at least a couple of articles in the mainstream press. And another good source is Environmental Health News. They publicize the studies like about the fish, but there is incredibly great more. There's growing awareness. There's various websites where people can find PFAS-free products, or look to see if products have tested to be contaminated with PFAS. But we have a really long way to go. There's bills that have passed, but to implement them so they actually have an impact is a heavy lift. I'm happy to talk elsewhere, at another time, or individually about some of that. There was a bill that passed, the legislature signed into law, that requires apparel broadly defined in New York to be PFAS free. I think it goes into effect in a year, the end of 2023. There's another bill that passed called, that signed into law, carpet stewardship, that requires carpet companies to take back their carpet and recycle them, and that was delayed by 3 years by Governor Hochul, but that also the implementation, but it also ends the use of PFAS in carpeting. And carpeting are highly contaminated with PFAS. It's used as a water repellent and stain repellent
Mhm.
in much of carpeting. So we're making small steps. We're taking small steps forward, and we need to take bigger steps. There's a ban on PFAS in food packaging, but I think that DEC is not implementing it in a strong way. And I will be writing something about that. Very, well-intentioned law, but no clear way to implement it in a meaningful way. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I think one of the most frustrating things is even if as individuals we want it, or even buyers for companies or the state, we want to do what's right, it's very hard to find out whether something has PFAS. And all these bans on PFAS are of intentionally added PFAS, whereas some PFAS is incidental because PFAS is used as a manufacturing aid with many different types of uses in factories. And I'll give you one example, which will horrify you. It's used because it's no stick. It's used to keep plastic in molds from sticking with the plastic in the mold. So when you're making,
That's where, ooh,
also FDA approved in 1985, and I could provide a documentation on this. They approved the fluorination of polyethylene for food grade polyethylene. And
what?
When?
1985, we didn't even know about PFAS. DuPont and 3M knew about PFAS, but the EPA and the FDA were unaware of PFAS because it was kind of a trade secret and no one told them. So yeah, I've been in touch with this chemical engineer for the Environmental Defense Fund, and also the public employees for environmental responsibility. They sent a letter to EPA, FDA, and USDA asking them to end this practice. Last year, nothing happened. So I would love to help ramp up these this call for action, because we are all absorbing PFAS from food ingredients and cosmetic and body care ingredients. It's horrifying. I mean, the levels that were allowable under this rule were like 5,000 parts. I have to look it up. It's 5,000 parts per something, maybe parts per million, which is like 1 million times higher than what the drinking water standard is, or close to that. Of total fluorine, they couldn't count PFAS because they didn't know what it was, but they were looking at total fluorine content. And what they do is they take a fluorine gas and they apply it to polyethylene barrels and maybe even to consumer size polyethylene. It's really not determined yet. And so when you apply the fluorine gas, I remember the very first slide, some of you were here, where there was a carbon chain with hydrogen atoms. And so you apply the fluorine pushes out the hydrogen, and you have PFAS. The top layer of these fluorinated polyethylene containers would be PFAS. Yeah. So, okay, I can go on for all day, so I'm going to stop.
I think Diana's a question.
Someone want to read the question?
Oh, she's going to say.
You speak it.
So polyethylene, I believe, is number 1 plastic, which a lot of food containers are. I think that's what you're saying.
Right.
And another, now that I just learned this new term from you, regrettable substitution, is New York State's styrofoam ban. And I noticed that there are restaurants now that are giving you to-go clamshell in polystyrene, which styrofoam is expanded polystyrene, and
Yeah.
number 6 plastic, which I believe also is a PFA.
I don't,
Yeah,
think-
it's
no, I
not
don't
in the
think,
agenda.
I don't think so, Diane, but I don't know. And I'm going to have another conversation with Tom Neltner, I think is his name, at Environmental Defense Fund, because he's
Well-
like a real geek on this stuff.
Yeah,
And
well, I think it would be good to know. I think part of it is, you know, if, you know, part of what they wanted to do was get this material out of to the stream, and then they just allowed the same product to just be a compressed, nice clear
Mhm.
plastic to give
Yes.
you your to-go stuff in. It's really problematic. So I've noticed that there are some restaurants in the Ithaca area that are giving clamshells with a number 6 plastic on it, which I think is just another thing to keep an eye on and point out.
Yeah,
the regrettable
even
stuff.
if it's not a PFAS thing, it's still not good.
exactly,
I don't think
yeah.
it's good either way.
Yeah, PFAS is not one of the resins, but it can be used as a coating. And, oh, I should just clarify, I just want to clarify, the PFAS in food packaging ban only applies to PFAS in fiber-based packaging.
Oh,
And let me say one more thing. The reason they fluorinate the polyethylene, and the guy at EDF thought they're also fluorinating some polypropylene, but he couldn't find anything in the FDA rules allowing that. So he doesn't know if it was actually specifically allowed. But the reason this is done is because the PFAS basically creates a barrier that's more impermeable, so it keeps out moisture and oxygen. I think it was oxygen, but definitely moisture. So it prevents some, you know, spoilage of the food while contaminating it.
So it keeps your pizza box from absorbing the grease.
Yeah, well, that's banned now. So the pizza boxes cannot be, but we don't know whether it's being enforced because it's a very, very poor implementation plan. And you can find the implementation plan. I understand there's a manual link, a link to a manual on the DEC page for the PFAS in food packaging ban. So you can look that up. It's easy to find.
So Tracy, is it fair to say that the reason this wasn't on anybody's radar for a long time is because there was sort of a presumption that such a strong bond between the carbon and the fluorine meant that it was basically a non-reactive compound and wouldn't be a problem?
No. There's books written, there's lots of articles about the DuPont plant in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The first slide that that on my screen, it was from an article that was in the New York Times Magazine section. It's an excellent article. DuPont never told EPA about this chemical. They called it C6 or C8. I can't remember because it had that many carbons.
Mhm.
And the only reason it became known to, I mean, maybe people knew about it at EPA, but EPA wasn't attempting to regulate or find out what was wrong with it or anything, was because in this lawsuit, the first lawsuit, because a farmer, beef cattle farmer downstream of the plant and downstream of their landfill, all his cattle eventually died. And he found an attorney to represent him who on discovery got thousands and thousands of pages of documents from DuPont. They just thought they'd drown him in documents, but he read them and he discovered that this C6 or C8 compound was PFOA, was that they had done toxicological studies of the compound and they knew it was a carcinogen. They knew it was in the drinking water. They knew it caused birth defects in lab animals, and they had seen it cause birth defects in 2 women that were working with the PFOA in that part of the plant. So it was all known, but it was not reported. And we don't have a system where chemicals have to be tested and before they go on the market. We have a system where it's the responsibility of corporations to tell the federal agencies that something is a hazard. And so DuPont was ultimately fined something like $16 million, which was like the largest fine for this kind of thing. I have the number in my slide set. And yet by the time that fine was imposed, the entire planet was contaminated with PFAS chemicals, even the Arctic. Almost every American has PFAS in their blood. It's in the food chain, globally. So,
Tracy,
yeah.
I hear just the conduit for the information, but I'm just feeling like, on a brighter note, the Israelis and the Palestinians are killing each other, and the Ukrainians and the Russians are still at war, getting more weapons to create more havoc.
Well, I mean, it's really funny. Somehow, I mean, there's something wrong with me because I don't really get depressed about this. I'm outraged, but it doesn't like make me feel like I should just give up, because I think it's so exciting to see what has already been done to push back on this. And I think millions of people are becoming aware worldwide. There's a call for PFAS-free products. And ultimately, I mean, this is going to go the way of DDT and PCBs, but only after wreaking tremendous havoc. So,
Yeah.
and we have to learn and stop other things from going on the market. So, I mean, I just think the lawsuit that did that epidemiological study was brilliant. And people were so downtrodden, they didn't dare say anything. They couldn't find a lawyer locally. They couldn't find a vet. The farmer whose cows were dying couldn't get a vet out because it was a company town. And
But
things.
the interesting thing in the way things seem to work, that movie came out in 2019. So we're 4 years since it was released, plus the production time to make it, plus the years before when it actually happened.
Yes.
All of that dynamic, and yet that it was only just now that the carpet bill was passed in New York State, and the governor extended the limit.
Right. She wanted to allow the burning of the carpet, but that didn't go through.
Right. So it's just intriguing the way we're societally too slow picking up on how to impact these harms that are being done in the interests of economic benefit.
Right. We should all take the last slide and carry that around,
Yeah. Thank you for bringing deeper into our awareness.
Right. I think the main point is we have to realize that our state agencies are not going to protect us. They have never protected us from toxic chemicals.
Okay.
And they won't protect us, and we need to advocate. Okay,
yes.
so the end.
Yes. It's almost 8. And,
Okay, you need to do things.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and everybody for being generous with your time. I think in the interest of time, we want to make a vote for the resolution. I dropped the link a little while ago so you can review, and I also send you individually the resolution draft. Is anybody opposed to the resolution? If anybody is opposed, please raise your hand. I'm glad you dropped this hand down, Jonathan. Thank you. Okay, so we are passing this unanimously. Thank you. So that's good. Yay, thank you so much. And what we are going to do is I'm going to post it on the website, and I'm going to post it on social media. And also Maria, who's here, she's from another organization, People for Healthy Planet. So like from another organization. So she said that she's gonna work to get the resolution passed in their organization too. Our Zero Waste Ithaca is actually a second in the state. This one was passed in the Zero Waste Capital District first. in Albany area. This is the second. And
Actually, there's about 7 others that have passed it, but they're not, yeah.
I didn't know.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, well, no, it's great. I
See?
mean,
7
Zero
others,
Waste Orange
great. So we got
County
the
and the
8.
Adirondack Compost Education Council and the Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions, which is an anti-incineration pro zero waste group in Westchester County. And people of Albany United for Safe Energy. And I've lost track of others.
I am so glad. So this is excellent. So like we are one of them. So
Yes, you're one of them. And thank you, thank you, thank you. And
you are welcome, welcome, welcome. And so like Maria's gonna do it. And if you could talk to any organization, other organization, you know, to pass this resolution so that like, you know, that, you know, that this practice is going to be banned in New York State.
that would be good.
The pressure up. So that would be great.
I'm just going to post my information in the chat. If you email me and you don't hear, feel free to call me. I am really suffering from carpal tunnel right now, so I'm not going to be as good about checking email as I used to be. So,
Right.
okay. So thank you. I'm going to say goodbye, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much.
But
And,
people who want any more information or want to make sure you see the briefing paper when it comes out from the Sierra Club, that would be great. Let me know and